The work that my lab and I are doing are about understanding the vulnerability of people and species to climate change. The alternative title of my presentation is "We are screwing it." There is just no other way that you can summarize what we are doing to our planet than this title. When you look at the climate, it turns out that the climate is a very important driver of social and ecological systems. You and I are living here just because the temperatures are right for us to live here. One of the things that is happening since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is that we are increasing our emission of greenhouse gases quite dramatically. Here you can see, for instance, the emissions of CO2 in a daily basis. Here you can see, for instance, the major emissions produced by the United States, Europe, and China. Of course, as you increase the amount of greenhouse gases, we know the laws of physics very well. What will happen is that the climate will start changing. Temperature is going up, sea level, rainfall is changing all over the place, the sea level is going up, pH down, and many other climatic changes are happening, all of it in connection to that increase of greenhouse gases. Now, given the fact that the climate influences ecological systems, species are forced to move. Right? So if the species is here and it's likely to be here just because it's the right temperature, as you change the climate, the species is going to be facing one of three options. It's too hot here, I'm going to move somewhere else. Now think about that solution for a species from Hawaii. That species is stuck here, right? So that means that the species from Hawaii don't have that choice. That choice is for a species in the mainland. Now the other alternative, the other choice is for the species to adapt. Again, the problem for a species in Hawaii is that that option is not viable for the species here either. The reason being that these changes are happening just too fast for this species to generate the necessary adaptations. The other problem is that we are located on a tropical area. We don't know any record in our history of something like this. So it's very unlikely that this species had experienced this in the past. And what it means is that they probably lack the pre-adaptations to deal with this climate change. So that means that for most species in Hawaii and most species on islands in tropical places, the third option is going to be the most likely, which is that many of these species are going to go extinct. Of course, as we impair the capacity of impact these ecosystems, we are also impairing the capacity of these ecosystems to provide food and water and many things that you and I depend on. Now, it turns out that the climate might have these changes in the climate might have a more direct impact on people. It can lead to damages in infrastructure. It can also influence human health. Diseases like malaria, dengue, all of these things are spreading everywhere around the world because now these pathogens are finding suitable places where they were not supposed to be before. Now, another thing that we are doing right now is to study the extent to which climate change can kill you. You might think, wow, this guy is very exaggerated. But climate change can kill you. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. In Europe, in 2003, 50,000 people died in 1 week. 50,000 of them. Why? Because the temperature got to be too hot. 50,000, and then we started studying this thing, thinking that maybe this was an isolated case. It turns out that the same thing repeated itself in 2005, 2010. It did happen in Russia, it did happen in China. Now we have over 2,000 papers sitting on my desk documenting heat waves killing people all around the world. Now, the other consequence for humans is displacement. See, as soon as you start losing food and water, what do you think is going to happen to the people that is living there? These people is going to start moving. And the problem for humans is that we have something that is called a geopolitical boundary. So it's not like a species that you can go anywhere. As a human being, you are blocked by something that is called a border between two countries. Now imagine what it will be if Mexico were to lose the suitability of the climate to produce agriculture, which is the main sector to generate jobs in Mexico. My guess is that all of the unemployment in Mexico, all of that people is probably going to try to migrate to the United States. This is happening everywhere around the world. It's happening in Bangladesh. All of these islands that are going to be losing their land. What do you think is going to happen to that people? Now, all of this to tell you that today, for humanity and for science, one of the main questions is to understand how vulnerable are we to this. Let me show you some of the work that I had done in my lab. Everything that I'm about to show you has been peer reviewed, and I have done the homework myself. So here, for instance, you can see the expected changes in the ocean. In the ocean, this is the projected change in temperature. The ocean is gonna get a lot warmer. We are gonna be reducing the oxygen as well, reducing the pH, and on top of that, we are taking the food out of the ocean. This is what we are doing to the ocean. Now, think about all of the marine species and ecosystems that will be impacted by that. Imagine the challenge for those species to adapt to all of those changes altogether. Another thing that you should note from these maps is that in red is bad and in blue is good. You don't see any blue on those maps, meaning that those species have nowhere in the world where they can find a refuge for this thing. People depend on those goods and services. We calculated, and this paper was published in PLOS Biology last year, we calculated that about 900 million people today have their entire livelihoods at stake for these changes in the ocean. This is people that is going to be losing their jobs, the food supply. 870 million people. Let's move to the land. What about on land? For land, we are developing this paper. It's now in peer review. We decided to calculate something that we define as the suitable plant growing season. This is the number of days in a year in which all of the climatic conditions, temperature, water, and radiation are suitable for you to grow plants. So we just wanted to calculate how many days in a year are suitable for you to grow plants. What I'm about to show you is the difference between today and 2100. Before I show you the map, let's look at the colors. If you are in red, that means that those places are going to be losing up to 200 days. And as you can see, all tropical areas are on that side. Now, if you are a farmer, or even if you have planted a plant, can you imagine how hard will it be to grow a plant when you are losing 200 days? I mean, unless you become a magician, you can expect that plants are just not going to have sufficient time to grow. Now, climate change is not always bad though. And you can see in blue the places in the world where climate change is actually going to be beneficial to grow plants. And those countries are Canada, Russia, and China. Now, I have to tell you that I'm very thankful that we are in good terms with the Canadians, but I have to tell you that given this thing, what this is saying is that the power to feed the world is going to be in the hands of these three countries. So you better don't piss off the Canadians. Because I just tell you that I cannot imagine the political leverage that climate change will give to countries like China and Russia when they will have the power to feed the world. Think on that for a second. Imagine the food that is in your table depending on the decisions that Vladimir Putin will do. This guy will starve us to death. And that's where we are heading with changes on land. We calculated that about 2.3 billion people are vulnerable to these changes. This is people that will lose their livelihoods and food supply. Now, how much time do we have for this? To calculate this, we actually invented a new term that is called the year of climate departure. Let me explain this term for Hawaii. This is Hawaii there. Here you can see the temporal variability in temperature for Hawaii during the last 150 years. From this model, we took the minimum and the maximum value, and then we look at the models to calculate the year after which the temperature in the future is going to move beyond anything that you have seen before. According to that model, that year is the year 2029 for the state of Hawaii. According to this model, by 2029, chances are that Hawaii is going to have a climate unlike something that we haven't seen before, unless you are older than 200 years. Now, what about globally? That's just Hawaii. Globally, what we found in red are places in the world in which climate change has already happened or will happen within the next decade. And in blue, places in which climate change is going to happen by the year 2100. As you can see, pretty much all of this map is red or orange. The global average timing of climate departure will be the year 2047, plus or minus on error among models. Within less than 50 years, we are going to change the entire climate of our planet. Now, one of the things that you hear very often, and by the way, we calculated that between 1 and 5 billion people are vulnerable to this. One of the things that you often hear about climate change is that this is a legacy to our children or to our grandchildren. To be honest with you, I am a father now. I find that remark so disappointing. I mean, what kind of father are you? To live in that present to your father? I mean, isn't that embarrassing to say that? Now, however, one of the things that we found with this paper is that climate change is something that we are going to live to see. By 2020 in tropical places, 2047 at the global scale, this is just 34 years into the future, which is going to be the time in which the entire planet is going to change their climate. Now, this is me right there. I'm 39. In 34 years, I'm going to be 72. So this is a present that I'm leaving to myself. So Camilo, my friend, this is my present to you. I hope you like it hot. Now, all of the things that I have been doing are about global in scope. The reason being that the magnitude of the change is huge. But of course, I'm doing these presentations in Hawaii, and very often I get the question of, okay, what does it mean for Hawaii? And here I'm going to summarize what does it mean climate change for Hawaii? Let me summarize the report. By the way, it was published by Sea Grant. The name is there. It's upside. You want to look at the temperature of the air it has already warmed up by about 0.1 degrees Celsius, and it could be up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2047. This is going to influence food supply, and it's going to influence human health. As I told you, this thing can kill people already. Sea warming could be up to 2.2 degrees Celsius and up to 2.7 degrees Celsius by the year 2047. This is also going to influence food supply, especially fisheries and things like that. And I think that it's going to influence jobs as well. The reason being that today, the GDP of the state depends on tourism. Who in the hell is going to pay a lot of money to come to Hawaii to see the corals? That is the amount of jobs that we are putting at stake if our corals are gone. Sea level rise has already increased by about 3.3 centimeters and up to 3 feet by the year 2100. This is a map that we just saw there, which is the projected change of sea level rise in Waikiki. The new shoreline could be up to 1 mile inland at a total cost of about $2 billion a year by the year 2100. And that's what it means for Hawaii. What is this going to influence? Well, this is going to influence housing. Whoever has their house on that zone is going to lose it. And it's also going to influence jobs. Now, what about drought? They also documented that drought is going to be intense in some places, excessive rain in another, that is going to influence food supply. You need water to grow plants. And it's going to influence the amount of water that we had. They also show that there's going to be a decrease in precipitation and reduction of stream flow and aquifer recharge, and that is going to influence water and food. Ocean acidification, about 30% increase, and that's going to influence our corals and the jobs that come from that. And human health, they found that that's going to influence as well, especially the spread of diseases like dengue fever. Now, the Huffington Post, I don't know if I'm spelling this correctly or not, they actually covered the story, and the title of their presentation is that climate change will ruin Hawaii. Climate change will ruin Hawaii, and that's the title of the Huffington Post. Now, this is what I want you to think about though. Climate change is going to influence our water, our food, no jobs, and no houses. In my opinion, saying that climate change will ruin Hawaii is just the polite way of saying that we will be screwed. Now, climate change we need to see climate change from a different perspective. Climate change is not only about our emission of greenhouse gases. Climate change is also about the extent to which we are destroying ecosystems that are not sequestering that CO2 anymore. And unfortunately, that loss of habitat is leading to the destruction of ecosystems. We're taking ecosystems that look like that can take an incredible amount of CO2, and we are turning those ecosystems into things that look like this. My background is in ecology, and one of the things that worries me quite a lot after having studied this thing for 20 years is that we know very well that these changes are very, very hard to reverse. In the history of our planet, we know this has happened before. It took us 10 million years to recover from it. Very good scientific evidence to suggest that these changes are very hard to reverse. The ultimate consequence of that is the extinction of a species.